My boyfriend texted me begging for $15,000 because of an emergency. Less than an hour later, I found him inside a luxury jewelry store, spending almost all of it on another woman. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 33 years old, and until everything fell apart, I genuinely thought I knew where my life was headed. Ryan and I had been together for 3 years. We spent holidays with each other's families, had lazy Sundays on the couch, and talked about all the things couples talk about when they think they're building a future together. Marriage came up often, so did kids. Looking back, I can see there were warning signs along the way, but at the time I dismissed them because I loved him, and because trusting the person you're planning a future with feels normal until you discover it wasn't. Everything started on a Thursday afternoon while I was finishing a report at work. My phone buzzed, and when I saw Ryan's name, I opened the message immediately. Claire, I need $15,000 right now. Emergency. Please don't ask questions. Just transfer it. I'll explain everything later. Please hurry. My stomach dropped. Ryan's father had ongoing health problems, and his younger sister seemed to attract chaos wherever she went. In the space of a few seconds, my mind ran through every terrible possibility I could think of. I called him immediately. Voicemail. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I sent a text asking if he was okay. No response. I asked where he was. Nothing. Every call went unanswered, and the longer the silence lasted, the more worried I became. The money was sitting in my savings account. I'd spent almost a year building it up through extra shifts and careful budgeting. It wasn't money I could easily replace, but if someone I loved was dealing with a genuine emergency, I wasn't going to hesitate. So I transferred the entire amount. Then I sent another message. Done. Please tell me you're okay. No reply came. I tried to focus on work afterward, but it was impossible. Every few minutes, I checked my phone, hoping for an update. Instead, about 15 minutes later, another notification appeared. Months earlier, Ryan had added me to receive alerts connected to one of his accounts. We'd set it up as a practical thing in case either of us ever needed help handling something urgent. I never paid much attention to those notifications. Until that afternoon. The alert showed a transaction for $14,875. I stared at the amount, then looked at the location underneath it. A luxury jewelry store. I read it again because my brain refused to process what I was seeing. A jewelry store made no sense. This wasn't a hospital, a mechanic, a lawyer, or anything remotely connected to an emergency. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was fraud. Maybe somebody had stolen his card. Maybe there was some mistake. But a feeling settled in my stomach that I couldn't ignore. I called him again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. I texted him. Ryan, call me. Right now. Nothing. The jewelry store was about 40 minutes away. I sat at my desk staring at the notification, trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. After 3 years together, I wanted to believe there was. Then I looked back at his original message. Please don't ask questions. The words hit differently now. Less like panic. More like preparation. I grabbed my purse, picked up my keys, and left work. The drive felt longer than it should have. Every red light gave me another minute to come up with an explanation that would make this make sense. Maybe he was buying something for his mother. Maybe there was a surprise I wasn't supposed to know about. Maybe there was some ridiculous misunderstanding that would leave me feeling foolish for rushing over there. By the time I pulled into the area, even I didn't believe those explanations anymore. I spotted Ryan's car almost immediately. It was parked right outside the jewelry store. For a few seconds, I stayed in my car and looked through the front window, still hoping I'd find some detail that would calm me down. Instead, I saw Ryan. He was standing beside a display case, smiling and talking to someone. Whatever emergency had supposedly required $15,000, it clearly wasn't happening now. He looked relaxed, happy even. Then I noticed the woman standing beside him, a woman I'd never seen before. She was attractive, well-dressed, and standing close enough that nobody would mistake them for casual acquaintances. Her hand rested lightly on his arm. His hand was on her back. The gesture looked natural, practiced, like something neither of them thought twice about. A sales associate was showing them items inside a glass case while they talked and laughed together. My chest tightened. The longer I watched, the harder it became to explain away what I was seeing. The way they stood together told me everything before either of them said a word. And judging by how excited they both seemed, they were shopping for something important. Then I looked at the display case again and remembered exactly where the money had come from, my savings account. I sat there staring through the window, trying to reconcile the man I'd spent 3 years loving with the man standing inside that store. Then the woman laughed at something he said, and Ryan looked at her in a way I recognized immediately. I had seen that look before. He used to look at me that way. Whatever denial I had left disappeared. I got out of the car, crossed the street, and walked toward the entrance. By the time I pushed open the door, I wasn't even thinking about explanations anymore. I just wanted the truth. The store was quiet except for a few conversations and soft background music. Ryan still hadn't noticed me. Neither had the woman. I moved closer and caught part of their conversation. "I think this one is perfect," the woman said. Ryan smiled. "Yeah, I do too." The sales associate started talking about engraving options and custom orders. That's when it hit me that this wasn't some impulsive purchase. Whatever they were doing had been planned in advance. The sales associate looked up first. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw me standing there. A second later, Ryan turned around. I've never forgotten that expression. Pure shock. His face went completely pale. The woman followed his gaze and looked at me, clearly confused. Nobody spoke. So I did. "Hey, Ryan." My voice sounded calmer than I felt. He stared at me. I glanced toward the display case. "How's the emergency going?" The color drained from his face even further. The woman looked between us. "Ryan?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Nothing came out. Finally, he managed, "What are you doing here?" I almost laughed. "I transferred $15,000 because you told me there was an emergency. Then I got a transaction alert showing that almost all of it was spent here." I gestured toward the display case. "So I figured I'd check." The woman took a small step away from him. I could practically see the questions forming in her head. Ryan immediately reached for my arm. "Claire, can we talk outside?" I pulled away. "No. Please. No." For years, I'd followed him outside whenever he wanted privacy during difficult conversations. I wasn't doing that anymore. The woman looked directly at me. "Who are you?" Ryan looked like he already knew what was coming. "I'm his girlfriend." The woman's expression changed instantly. "What?" Ryan closed his eyes. Just briefly, like he was bracing for impact. "We've been together for 3 years," I said. Emily looked at me for a second, like she was trying to decide whether I was telling the truth or whether I was just another problem she hadn't expected to walk into. The woman slowly turned toward him. 3 years? "Emily, let me explain." Her name was Emily, and judging by the look on her face, she was learning about me at exactly the same moment I was learning about her. "You told me you were single." Emily's voice was quiet, but there was a sharpness to it now that hadn't been there a moment earlier. Ryan looked trapped. "Emily, please." "No." She kept her eyes on him. "You told me your last relationship ended last year." I felt my stomach twist. Ryan and I had spent that entire year together, vacations, birthdays, holidays with his family. Yet somehow he'd convinced Emily that relationship was already over. None of that fit with the story he'd apparently been telling her. Emily looked at me again. "You're really his girlfriend? Do you have a picture of you two together?" I unlocked my phone and opened a photo from Thanksgiving at his parents' house. Emily stared at it for several seconds. That's when I watched the last bit of doubt leave her face. I nodded. "We've been together for 3 years. The confusion on her face disappeared and was replaced by something much worse. She looked hurt, not because of me, because she was realizing she had been lied to too. Ryan ran a hand through his hair. "Both of you need to let me explain." Emily laughed once, a short, bitter sound. "Explain what? That you've been dating 2 women at the same time?" The sales associate quietly backed away from the counter, clearly wishing she were somewhere else. Ryan ignored her. "Emily, it's more complicated than that." "Is it?" she asked. Then she pointed toward me. "Because she says you've been together for 3 years. He didn't answer. Emily looked back at me. "When did you find out about me?" "About 10 minutes ago." The answer seemed to hit her harder than anything else. She looked down at the display case and shook her head. Oh my God. For a second, neither of us said anything. It wasn't awkward. It was the strange realization that we had both walked into the same lie from different directions. Then Emily looked at Ryan again. "You told me she was your ex." Ryan's eyes closed briefly. That was all the confirmation either of us needed. Emily folded her arms. "So every time I asked why I never met anyone from your life, every excuse was a lie." "Emily." "No, seriously, tell me which part was true." Ryan looked exhausted now, like he was desperately searching for a version of the story that wouldn't completely destroy him. "There wasn't one." I pulled out my phone. "Actually, there's something else she should know." Ryan immediately stiffened. "Claire, don't." I ignored him and opened the text message he'd sent me earlier. "Emergency. Please don't ask questions. Just transfer it." I handed the phone to Emily. She read the message once, then again. When she looked up, her expression had changed completely. "What is this?" I pointed toward Ryan. "He sent me that this afternoon." Emily frowned. "And?" "He asked me for $15,000. The color drained from her face. "You sent it?" "Every dollar." She looked at Ryan as if she genuinely didn't recognize him anymore. "You took $15,000 from her?" "It wasn't like that." The response came so quickly it sounded automatic. Neither of us believed him. Emily looked back at me. The money paid for this? I nodded. The transaction alert came through less than an hour ago. Ryan tried again. I was going to pay her back. This time even Emily looked offended by the explanation. That's your defense? Emily. No, seriously. She shook her head. You lied to her, took her money, lied to me, and somehow that's the explanation you're going with? Ryan didn't answer, because there wasn't a better answer. Emily turned toward the sales associate. What exactly were we buying? The associate hesitated. A custom luxury watch. Emily stared at her. Custom? Yes. The associate looked uncomfortable. The engraving order had already been submitted. I watched Emily absorb that information. The custom order. The money. The lies. Every piece was fitting together. Slowly, she removed the ring Ryan had given her and placed it on top of the glass counter. Ryan's eyes widened. Emily. She stepped back. No. Please listen to me. I've been listening to you for months. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't look away. And apparently that's been the problem. Ryan took a step toward her. She immediately moved farther back. The distance between them seemed to say everything neither of them needed to put into words. Then she looked at me. Not with anger. Not with suspicion. Just disappointment at the situation both of us had somehow ended up in. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I nodded. So am I. Neither of us had done anything to each other. The only person responsible for what was happening was standing right in front of us. Ryan looked from Emily to me, clearly realizing he was losing both versions of the future he'd been trying to maintain. For the first time all afternoon, he seemed genuinely scared. And the worst part for him was that the confrontation inside the jewelry store wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. When I walked back to my car, I expected to feel angry. Instead, I felt numb. The confrontation had answered every question I'd driven there with, but somehow that didn't make any of it easier to process. 3 years is a long time to spend building a life with someone. Even after seeing everything with my own eyes, part of my brain was still trying to catch up with reality. My phone started ringing before I even left the parking lot. Ryan's name kept flashing across my screen. Every time the call stopped, another one followed. By the time I left the parking lot, he'd already tried 6 times. I didn't answer any of them. I knew exactly what would happen if I did. There would be explanations, half-truths, promises, excuses. And right then, I wasn't interested in any of them. I drove home in silence. The entire way, my mind kept replaying small moments from the last 3 years. Conversations that had seemed harmless at the time suddenly looked different. Nights when Ryan claimed he was working late. Weekends when he was unexpectedly unavailable. Plans that had been canceled at the last minute. Individually, none of those things had seemed suspicious. Now they felt impossible to ignore. By the time I reached my apartment, I had stopped asking whether he'd lied. The only question left was how much. I walked inside, locked the door, and stood there for a moment looking around. Ryan's jacket was still hanging by the entryway. His favorite mug was in my kitchen. A spare toothbrush sat beside mine in the bathroom. Pieces of a relationship that had looked completely normal less than 24 hours earlier. My phone buzzed again. Another call. Then a text. Claire, please talk to me. I ignored it. A second message appeared almost immediately. This isn't what it looks like. That one actually made me laugh. Because I had literally watched him standing in a jewelry store with another woman while spending money he'd obtained through a fake emergency. I wasn't sure what alternative interpretation he thought existed. I tossed my phone onto the table and tried to clear my head. A few minutes later, another notification appeared. Voicemail. Curiosity finally got the better of me. I pressed play. Claire, please call me back. Ryan sounded panicked. I know you're upset, but I can explain everything. I leaned back in my chair. There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. An explanation. As though the right combination of words could somehow change what had happened. The voicemail continued. Emily doesn't know the whole story. I rolled my eyes. That sentence told me everything. Even now, he was focused on controlling different versions of the truth. Different stories for different people. The exact thing that had gotten him into this situation in the first place. I deleted the voicemail. By midnight, more than 20 missed calls and several voicemails were waiting on my phone. The next morning, I woke up to a text message. Please tell me what I need to do to fix this. I stared at it while drinking my coffee. For the first time since the jewelry store, the answer felt incredibly simple. Return the money. That was it. No speeches. No dramatic conversations. No explanations. Just return the money. I replied with a single sentence. I want the full $15,000 back today. The response came less than a minute later. I can't. I read those 2 words twice. Then a third time. Not because I didn't understand them. Because I did. Perfectly. And they changed everything. The money wasn't sitting in his account. He hadn't planned to send it back immediately. Whatever he'd done, he had already committed to it. Another text appeared. The watch can't be refunded. I stared at the screen. The entitlement of that message was almost unbelievable. As if spending the money somehow solved the problem. As if the fact that it was already gone meant I was supposed to accept losing it. For the first time since leaving the jewelry store, I called him. Ryan answered immediately. Claire. No, you're going to listen. The panic in his voice disappeared. He knew better than to interrupt me. I transferred that money because I believed somebody was in trouble. Silence. I thought there was a medical emergency. I thought someone needed help. I know. No, Ryan, I don't think you do. I looked at the screenshot of his text message still sitting on my phone. You knew I wouldn't send $15,000 for a luxury watch. He didn't respond. You knew I'd ask questions. Still nothing. So you created an emergency instead. His breathing became audible on the other end of the line. Finally, he said, I was going to pay you back. The excuse sounded weak even to him. With what money? He had no answer. Because we both knew the truth. If he had $15,000 available, he wouldn't have needed mine. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was emotional. Because I was tired. Tired of the lies. Tired of the excuses. Tired of hearing him search for a version of events that somehow made this acceptable. What happens now? He asked quietly. I looked down at the text message that had started everything. Emergency. Please don't ask questions. The more I read it, the more deliberate it felt. Every word had been chosen carefully. Every word designed to get exactly the result he wanted. And suddenly the situation felt a lot bigger than a failed relationship. If the money isn't back in my account by midnight, I said, I'm going to the police. The silence on the line lasted several seconds. Then Ryan spoke. You'd really do that? The question surprised me. Not because he asked it. Because he genuinely seemed shocked by the possibility. As if he still believed there was some version of this story where I would quietly absorb the loss and move on. I ended the call without answering. By 11:30 that night, the money still hadn't been returned. And I had already made my decision. At 12:01 a.m., I filed the report. There was nothing dramatic about it. No speech, no sense of victory. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table with a folder full of screenshots, transaction records, text messages, and call logs. The officer who took my statement was calm and professional. She asked straightforward questions and took notes while I answered them. When did he ask for the money? What exactly did he say? Why did you send it? Did he tell you what it was actually for before the transfer? Has he returned any of it? I answered honestly. At one point, she read the message herself. Emergency. Please don't ask questions. Just transfer it. She looked up. So you believe somebody was in danger? Yes. What made you think that? I thought it might be medical. His father has health issues. She nodded and continued writing. The call lasted less than half an hour, but when it ended, I realized something. Ryan had been treating the situation like relationship drama. The officer wasn't. She wasn't interested in our history, our arguments, or whether we still loved each other. She was looking at facts. A message. A transfer. A purchase. A timeline. And those facts weren't changing no matter how many explanations Ryan offered. I finally went to bed around 2 in the morning. When I woke up, my phone was full of notifications. Ryan had called repeatedly. So had a few numbers I didn't recognize. One voicemail came from his mother. That caught me off guard. In 3 years, she'd never called me directly. Not once. I listened while making coffee. Claire, please call me back. We need to talk before this gets out of hand. The wording immediately bothered me. Before this gets out of hand. From my perspective, things had gotten out of hand when Ryan invented an emergency and used it to get $15,000 from me. Still, a few hours later, she called again. This time I answered. The conversation started politely enough. Ryan made mistakes, she said. The moment she called Ryan's lies mistakes, I knew exactly where the conversation was headed. She wasn't calling to talk about what happened. She was calling to minimize 6 months of deception and repackage it as confusion. Finally, I asked, what exactly are you calling for? She hesitated. Then she got to the point. You need to withdraw the report. I almost laughed. There it was. The real reason for the call. Not concern. Not accountability. Damage control. Why? I asked. She sounded genuinely surprised that I even needed an explanation. Because you're destroying his future. The irony would have been funny if the situation hadn't been so exhausting. For years, I'd helped Ryan build his future. I'd supported him, trusted him, and planned my own life around the relationship. Now somehow I was responsible for the consequences of his decisions. I kept my voice calm. His future became his responsibility when he sent that text. The conversation went downhill after that. She accused me of lacking compassion, suggested I was acting out of anger, implied that people in relationships should handle problems privately. Eventually I ended the call, not because we'd reached an understanding, because it was obvious we weren't going to. Over the next few days, the pressure spread. Mutual friends started reaching out. Some were polite, others weren't. One person told me I was overreacting. Another suggested heartbreak was clouding my judgment. A third insisted that involving the police was unnecessary. What fascinated me was that almost nobody asked what had actually happened. Most of them already had a version of the story. And in that version, Ryan was a good guy who'd made a mistake. Meanwhile, I had somehow become the unreasonable ex refusing to let things go. At first it bothered me. Then a letter arrived. 6 handwritten pages. Ryan's handwriting. I sat at my dining table and read every word. The beginning sounded like an apology. The middle sounded like justification. By the end, it felt like neither. He wrote about being confused, about meeting Emily, about feeling trapped between 2 different futures. He described himself as someone overwhelmed by circumstances rather than someone making deliberate choices. But one paragraph stood out from everything else. In it, he admitted he knew I wouldn't send the money if I understood what it was really for. He admitted that's why he described it as an emergency. I read that section 3 times. Then I put the letter down. Because whether he realized it or not, he'd just written down the one thing he'd spent weeks trying not to say out loud. The next morning, I forwarded the entire letter to my attorney. A few hours later, he called. His first question was simple. Do you still have the original? Yes. Good. There was a brief pause. Then he added, keep every page. This could become very important. At the time, I thought the letter was the biggest mistake Ryan could make. I was wrong. A much bigger one was already on the way. A week after I sent Ryan's letter to my attorney, things suddenly went quiet. The nonstop calls slowed down. The messages became less frequent. Even his family stopped reaching out. At first, I thought reality had finally caught up with everyone. Maybe somebody had convinced Ryan that the evidence wasn't going away. Maybe he'd accepted that there wasn't an explanation capable of undoing what he'd done. That assumption lasted about 4 days. Then I got a call from a detective. The moment he introduced himself, my stomach tightened. Not because I thought I was in trouble, because I knew immediately that something new had happened. After confirming my identity, he explained that he needed to ask a few questions regarding a complaint that had recently been filed. I listened quietly. The complaint claimed that I had been financially controlling throughout my relationship with Ryan. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. Then he continued. According to the report, I monitored Ryan's spending, pressured him into sharing financial information, and used money to manipulate him. The complaint also suggested that my report against him wasn't about deception at all. It claimed I was retaliating because the relationship had ended. I sat there staring at my kitchen wall. The accusation wasn't just false. It was absurd. Months earlier, Ryan had voluntarily added me to receive account alerts. He'd signed the paperwork himself. At the time, he'd described it as practical and responsible. Now, apparently, that same decision had become evidence that I'd been controlling him. The detective asked a simple question. Did he voluntarily authorize the account access? Yes. Do you have documentation? I do. Can you send it today? Absolutely. The paperwork was already organized. Within an hour, I'd emailed everything. The authorization forms, the account records, the messages, the timeline. Every document showed the same thing. Ryan made those decisions himself. Nobody forced him. Nobody pressured him. 2 days later, the detective called back. His tone was noticeably different, less cautious, more direct. We reviewed everything. I waited. The evidence doesn't support the complaint. I wasn't surprised. Still, hearing someone else say it out loud felt important. The detective continued carefully. The timing also raises concerns. That was probably the most professional way possible to say what everybody already knew. The complaint hadn't appeared before the investigation. It hadn't appeared before the report. It hadn't appeared before consequences started showing up. It appeared afterward. Exactly afterward. Once the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time. The affair had hurt. The money had hurt. But this was different. Ryan wasn't trying to avoid responsibility anymore. He was actively trying to rewrite reality. And for the first time since everything started, I stopped mourning the relationship. The version of Ryan I had spent weeks grieving no longer existed. Maybe it never had. A few days later, another development arrived, this time through my attorney. Ryan's legal team wanted to negotiate. The proposal was simple. Drop everything. Accept a partial repayment. Sign an agreement preventing either of us from discussing what happened. When my attorney finished reading the offer, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insulting. The amount they offered wasn't even half of what I'd transferred, and somehow they expected me to quietly walk away. My attorney didn't even hesitate. We're rejecting that. I agreed immediately. By that point, the issue wasn't about compromise. Compromise requires both sides to acknowledge reality. Ryan still seemed determined to avoid doing that. Every time he faced a consequence, he searched for another explanation, another excuse, another person to blame, anyone except himself. Several weeks later, the preliminary hearing finally arrived. Walking into the courthouse felt surreal. A year earlier, I had been imagining a future with Ryan. Now I was carrying folders full of evidence. Life can change faster than you think. Ryan was already there when I arrived. So were his parents. His mother looked exhausted. His father looked older than I remembered. Ryan looked different too. Thinner, more anxious, more tired. For a brief second, I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the text. Emergency. Please don't ask questions. And the sympathy faded. Inside the courtroom, everything became remarkably simple. The messages were presented. The transfer records were presented. The purchase records. The timeline. The letter. Each piece connected cleanly to the next. Ryan's attorney tried to argue that the money had been a gift, that emotions complicated things, that misunderstandings happen in relationships. The judge listened patiently, then asked one question. When Mr. Carter used the word emergency, what exactly did he intend Miss Bennett to believe? The room became very quiet, because everyone already knew the answer. Ryan knew. His attorney knew. His parents knew. And I knew. The word wasn't accidental. It was chosen because it created urgency. It discouraged questions. It encouraged immediate action. The more the timeline was examined, the harder that fact became to avoid. By the end of the hearing, the defense was visibly struggling. The case moved forward. Outside the courthouse, Ryan's family looked devastated. Ryan looked defeated. And standing there in the parking lot afterward, I finally understood something. None of this had started with lawyers. It hadn't started with investigators. It hadn't started in a courtroom. It started with a decision, a text message, a lie. Everything that followed grew out of that moment. As I walked toward my car, I realized I had spent months asking myself the wrong question. I kept wondering how I had missed the warning signs, how I had trusted the wrong person. But trusting someone you love isn't a mistake. Abusing that trust is. For the first time since the jewelry store, I felt genuinely at peace. Not because everything was resolved, not because the past didn't hurt, but because I finally stopped carrying responsibility for choices that were never mine. The future I thought I lost that day never actually existed. It was built on lies I simply hadn't discovered yet. Looking back, losing Ryan felt like the end of my future. It turned out to be the beginning of a better one.